Well, for some analysis, we're now joined by Abdullahi Boru Halakhe, who's Horn of Africa Policy and Security Analyst. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
All right, so Monday sees the beginning of more talks. First round this week in Kenya, to progress from the cessation of hostilities agreement signed last week. They say that a good beginning is this hotline. Tell us about this hotline and what difference it can make.
Before I do that, let me just, put our viewers into a good context. Article 6 of the cessation of hostilities states that the commandant from both sides would meet for 5 days, 5 days after the signing of the cessation of hostilities, to work on the modalities of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of the fighters in 30 days. So now this line of communication, the hotline, is to ensure that, the communication will not just be between the commandant who are now in Nairobi after the Pretoria talks, but also with the commandants and combatants in their respective regions. So these are, some of the earlier signs of how this process will be done. I want to emphasize two things. Number one, whereas TPLF is the political outfit that is leading this, and it's the one that signed the cessation of hostilities, they are not by any means the only fighting bloc inside Tigray. You have a TDF. TDF is, for all intent and purposes, a people's army. How you can go about demobilizing and reintegrating them is not going to be an easy solution. Furthermore, the demobilization of TDF is subject to the improvement of the security on the ground, because that is the litmus test. If you pass that test is when you agree to demobilize. But for many Tigrayans, they have not received the cessation of hostilities positively. So TDF, TPLF, they have their own military that is under the command, control, and communication of the centralized TPLF. But there is a huge chunk of teachers, journalists, medical doctors, and anybody and a farmer who have gone to the battlefield, or if you will, to the front line. How you can bring all those people will be an incredibly complicated process. But we always hope that these 35 days after the cessation of hostilities will deliver a positive story in what has been a really grim situation over the last 2 years.
If Twitter and other social media platforms are anything to go by, are we sure that there has been a cessation of hostilities, or is word still to get to some elements?
The reality is, personally, having been following this for the last 2 years, it is not going to be like we'll turn off on a switch and everything will be all right. There are teething problems, and this is partly because the way this cessation of hostilities is crafted was bound to create some of those and many more to come. The cessation of hostilities was between TPLF and the Ethiopian government. They are not the only warring parties. There is Eritrea, and there is an assortment of militias from some of these communities or regions. They are by no means bound by the cessation of hostilities. So I think that is one of the key tests again in the next coming days and weeks. If any of those are non-aligned, that means Eritreans continue fighting as they have been fighting in some pockets in Tigray, or assortments of militia groups like Fano continue fighting. That will create more problems. Never mind, the question of Western Tigray has not been part of the cessation of hostilities to begin with. So there are many there are multiple landmines in this cessation of hostilities. And the next few days, weeks, and months, but particularly the deadline of 30 days since the signing of cessation of hostilities for DDR will be incredibly critical, because it will give us a good roadmap of if other parts of the cessation of hostilities, I think it's around 12 articles, are going to be respected.
We spoke about this last week, but I guess as the politicians talk about the cessation of hostilities and perhaps finding a political solution, on the ground are real people that are starving, that have a lack of communication, that are in the midst of a famine, and medication is also an issue. I guess this perhaps needs to happen much quicker than everything else.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There is no doubt about it. Any one extra day of delay is going to be catastrophic. Last week when I was on your show, I mentioned that the margin of error for the implementation of A, the cessation of hostilities, and B, sustainable peace moving forward is critical in Tigray, in Ethiopia, and the entire Horn of Africa region. The mediators and the negotiators from both sides have an absolutely no margin for error. Any slight slip up that might lead to resumption of conflict is absolutely catastrophic, not just to the Tigrayans, 5.2 million who live in the Tigrayan region and in need of humanitarian aid, not for the people in the Afar region, which is closer to the Tigrayan region, and the Amara region. Never mind the Somali region that is also battling drought. Never mind the Oromia region, where fighting has already resumed. So this is not a question about just the Tigrayans and the federal government. It is a question of entire Ethiopia. A slip-up, a minor slip-up, a return to the day when the cessation of hostilities was signed is not going to be good for any particular party, and furthermore, the entire Ethiopia.
What do you think can be achieved in this round of talks post this signing of this agreement? It seems like it's not a lot of time.
There isn't time. Time is of essence in this. Time is absolutely of essence in this. But if, let's say, those hotlines are opened up, if, let's say, humanitarian aid or humanitarian groups are given unimpeded access to Tigray, and the cessation of hostilities hold, and people start getting food aid that they desperately need, that is a step in the right direction. If one child in Tigray who could die, his or her life is saved, that is positive. If, let's say, medical aid that has not gone in for the last 2 years sustainably is allowed to come in, that is a success. But trust me, my brother, none of those will matter if there will be another round of conflict inside Ethiopia. It is not in anybody's interest. Our hope, and our honest hope, is to always be hopeful that this cessation of hostilities will hold, and it will lead to a sustainable agreement that will go back to where this country was 2 years. I just want to emphasize there are probably over 2 million internally displaced people. There are 800,000 refugees, 100,000 of them from Eritrea, who are inside Ethiopia. These are the most vulnerable people. They left Eritrea to seek safety and security inside Ethiopia in the Tigrayan region mostly. They have already been displaced a few times. The humanitarian and aid agencies cannot reach them. And we've not had rain, adequate rain, for the last 5 seasons, including this, and a potential 6th failed season in March, April, and May. We are looking at an unprecedented crisis that does not only affect Ethiopia, but the conflict in Ethiopia makes it incredibly difficult.
Can these forces be reintegrated? And when we talk about reintegrated, is this bringing them into the national federal forces? What's the hope?
That's the ideal. The ideal is because some of them were people who were serving in the Ethiopian military before, Ethiopian federal military before. So an ideal circumstance is for all of them to be brought under one centralized command, because that is what the cessation of hostilities document says. Ethiopia will have one federal military. That is the ideal. But that is going to be very difficult. These are people who are faced as, combatants in the battlefield. And if we could borrow from what happened in South Sudan, and that process is not complete, it is going to be very, very, very difficult, but it's not impossible. But like with many peace processes, it is baby steps, and those steps have to be taken. And it's an organic process. You cannot short circuit this process and expect a positive or sustained outcome. The parties have got their job cut out for them. The mediators and facilitators have their job cut out for them. It's for the international community to ensure that there are costs to people who will violate the terms of ceasefire. It is on the international community also to continue supporting this process, to support the Ethiopia humanitarian aid, to support the refugees and IDP population, probably one of the most vulnerable groups in this, particularly the Tigrayan, Eritrean refugees, and the return potentially of Tigrayans who have fled the country, some in Sudan and some elsewhere.
Abdullahi, we'll leave it there for today. I've got no doubt we'll chat again very soon. Let's see how the rest of this week plays out. Thanks for your time as always.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure, my brother. Take care as always.
Thank you. All right, that's Abdullahi Boru Halakhe, who's Horn of Africa policy and security analyst, looking for us at the ongoing talks between the Tigrayan government representatives and the federal government of Ethiopia after these peace talks produced, of course, that cessation of hostilities agreement last week.